The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are located today. It has been hailing here at my college, so it's not quite spring, although the calendar says we are marching to May. I'd like to welcome you to our SIGUCCS webinar. A few quick housekeeping things. By default, you are all muted. The session is being recorded and will be posted on the SIGUCCS YouTube channel next week. You all can ask questions or chat using those features of GoToWebinar. So if you would chat hello or ask a quick question so I know you're here. There we go. Hi, Kathy. Okay, I'm looking for someone else to let me know they can hear me. There we go. Hi, Bill and Sue. Excellent. Okay. My name is Lori Fox. I am the chair of SIGUCCS, and I'm going to talk to you about a few things going on in SIGUCCS before I turn you over to our presenter. We have 3 more webinars scheduled and ready to go, and we will have a full series this year with at least 1 webinar every month. Next week, we continue our April theme with more managing students, a presentation by Robert Fricke on connecting students to life beyond the campus walls. In May, we're going to talk about communicating effectively, and in June, we're going to look at IT core competencies. So those are some great webinars to join. Next week's webinar, the registration link is already live on our website. I want to remind you that this is award nomination season. You can nominate a colleague or 2 for our SIGUCCS award. The Penny Crane Award for Distinguished Service is our most prestigious award. We usually give that to 1 awardee each year. And the Hall of Fame Award are for people who have contributed to SIGUCCS through their participation on conference committees or presentations, being on the board, that sort of thing. The criteria for the awards is available on our website. It is also time to nominate all of your best work for the SIGUCCS Communication Awards. These are best of categories recognizing your excellence in the area of IT communication. You have just about a month to submit your awards. And it's such a great program. Even if you're not a winner, you get great feedback about your projects from the people who won last year. Our conference is just about well, I think it's 100 days away. I've been counting on my phone. I don't have it up yet, but whoops. Our conference is going to be in Orlando this year. Registration opens in 1 month on May 21st. We are very excited to be in Orlando this year. Our keynote speakers have been announced. The opening keynote speaker is Jeffrey Salingo. You may know him. He's an author. He's going to be talking about There Is Life After College. And Geraldine Fitzpatrick, who is an ACM distinguished speaker, will talk with us about human-computer interaction. So those look like 2 great keynotes for the conference. Our pre-conference seminars, we have 4 seminars. 3 of them have been announced, and information is available about those. The 4th pre-conference seminar, look for details about that in the next week or so. We have a fantastic opportunity for a tour and presentation by the Disney Institute As you may know, the Disney customer service is absolutely legendary, and there is a lot we can learn from it. So at the Behind the Magic seminar, they're going to talk about customer service principles of several different service areas, and you'll get to see things in action. So that looks like a fantastic seminar. The other 3 seminars are led by people who you may know. If you check out on the webpage, they're familiar people to SIGUCCS. One is about being an inspirational leader. There's a project management workshop for non-project managers, kind of demystifying that process and the language. And then a workshop or a seminar on leading cultural change. I'm sorry to report we are not staying at the Hollywood Tower Hotel. We're going to be at Disney Coronado Springs Resort, which is a beautiful resort right on Disney property. You can go ahead and make your reservations for the hotel now. You have free transportation from the airport to the hotel on Disney's Magical Express. One of my favorite things about the Magical Express is they will grab your luggage for you and deliver it to your room. So no longer are you a sad face waiting by the luggage carousel, waiting for your luggage. Disney will deliver it right to you. You also have an opportunity to purchase Disney discount park tickets. I've already been looking at those, and they do represent a discount from the gate price that you ordinarily would pay. And they also have great discounts if you just want to go to the park at the end of the day after 5 o'clock. They have some conference attendee opportunities too. You do have an opportunity to join SIGUCCS. Our biggest membership benefits are, of course, the conference and pre-conference seminar discounts. You also have access to the ACM Digital Library, where you can see all of the papers contributed to by SIGUCCS members to the ACM Digital Library. You also can participate in the SIGUCCS mentoring program. And here's just a quick slide on how you can stay in touch with us. We have an email listserv. We also have a pretty active Facebook community, and we have a Twitter account. So I'm going to turn it over to Kendra Strode, who is our presenter today.
All right, can everybody hear me?
I can hear you, Kendra. Yes,
Fantastic.
people can hear you. So Kendra, I'm going to mute myself, but I may pop in once in a while if somebody has a question.
Excellent. That sounds fantastic. And Lori has graciously agreed to mind the chat window for me. So if you all send questions or comments or thoughts her way, she'll make sure that we know about them. All right. Well, as Lori said, my name is Kendra Strode. I am one of our computing support specialists managing the Helpdesk at Carleton College. And I had the great fortune to share this presentation at SIGUCCS last year on some of the work that I do with our student employees to both build up their skills, but also help us turn through our project backlog. And they invited me to share this with you all today. So my plan for today is to go ahead and work through kind of an expedited version of that presentation, but I've built in a few reflection moments, if you'll bear with the cheesiness of that. I do want to encourage you, if you have a notepad and pen, if you're feeling analog today, or notes app up, please take a moment and jot down some notes when we get to those moments. And then additionally, like I said, Lori will be monitoring the chat window, and so if you have ideas or questions throughout, as we get to some of those moments of reflection, that'll be a chance for her to come back in and share some of those ideas. So without further ado, I want to start this with a little bit of my inspiration in terms of why I started thinking that this project work was really the answer to a lot of our problems. And we're going way back to 3rd grade. I had an honors teacher in 3rd grade. Her name is Mrs. Peterson, probably one of the most epic teachers you could ever imagine having. Nothing was mundane. And part of that was because she expected a lot of us, but believed that we could get there. And one of the things she said that stuck with me to this day is that people will live up or down to the expectations that you set for them. And so she expected a lot of us, and we did plenty of work. And that, I remember being very engaged by that as a student. I had this adult that I respected who respected me in turn, and I was willing to work extra hard for that. Moving on, the next source of inspiration is actually somebody I never met. My granddad, Jack Wood, was a wildlife management professor, and the stories that I've heard of him is that students were first, always. And it wasn't just the numbers. He really worked to get to know them and know their families and engage them in the learning process. But even more important than that, a philosophy that he had revolved around giving tests. And if he gave a question on a test that a few people got wrong, well then, they probably should have studied and they were the ones who likely messed it up. But if he gave a question on a test and most everybody got it wrong, then he said that that was his responsibility. Something about the way he taught that particular topic or asked that particular question didn't work, and so it was his job to fix that. And so that element of the responsibility of sort of teaching and sharing information in an accessible way is something that's resonated with me. And then my third source of inspiration coming into this particular topic is my once boss, current colleague, Kevin Chapman. I was a student at Carleton first before I became a staff member here, and I worked for Kevin at our student support help desk. And within reason, he considered us colleagues and told us as much. He said, you're doing the work of the college. You are helping make the college happen, and I trust you to do so. He told us we were smart, which didn't hurt. That's always a pretty good motivator. But most importantly, he gave us reasonable space to explore, to try and fail as we were learning to provide information and tech support. And as a result, that gave us space to grow. And I bring these ideas up because particularly when it comes to this challenge of finding ways to engage, inspire, and challenge student workers, in general, being inspired matters, but in particular, it takes a lot of time and energy to kind of pour into building this system that we're going to talk about and supporting students through this work. And so knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it and why it matters to you and why you care about it helps get through a lot of the days, like today actually for me here, where you're running around pulling your hair out thinking, why did I sign myself up for this? And so we've talked about inspiration. There are a few starting assumptions that also lay the foundation for some of this independent project work that we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of in a minute. First of all, I don't think anybody would disagree that there's always more to do than can ever be done. And anytime you could get a Lion King reference in to life, really, I think you're doing something right. But I mean, the day-to-day never stops. Maintenance of computers, dealing with patching, dealing with projects, both the important ones and the ones you never get to. There is so much to address. It doesn't all rise to the level of a full-time project. Additionally, there's this idea that if you build it, they will come, just keeping on with various movie references. This ties to the fact that if I took the time to actually build an infrastructure that was reliable for my students to use and support them, they'll be successful in doing that process. This next assumption is one that I find I have to convince people of, which is that the time that it takes to build this pays back. And this is where it's oftentimes the hardest to kind of push through, because building project infrastructures does take an investment of time. And there's so often that sense that, well, if I just did it myself, it would be done and done faster. However, we all know that we have cycles of students. They have this nasty habit of graduating. And not only do we have to deal with constantly reinfusing the knowledge that they acquired during their time at the college, but the time that we invest in them gives them a sense of both independence and ownership over the service that they're providing. And every single time I've taken the time to invest in my students, it's paid back multifold. Additionally, there will be failures and there will be mistakes. That is a given. But you can do some work to minimize and have a contingency plan. And I'll talk a little bit about how we've made mistakes and how I've addressed it. And then the final one ties back to some of those sources of inspiration. And that's fundamentally believing that the students can do it. And it seems trivial to say, but I know that at the very core of my existence of working with students, I believe in them. They are phenomenal. And I know that because I've had the chance to work with some students that have gone above and beyond. And so sometimes just having that belief is enough to take a student who has not been as engaged give them a framework of scaffolding and tools to work with, and watch them turn into something magnificent. And so now we've got one of those reflection moments, and this is why. Why projects? Why Helpdesk? And that's my perspective. I don't know what capacity all of you are working with students in, but as I said, motivating students takes time and energy. Why do you, and by extension, should your students, care about the projects that you have on your plate and the work that you're doing? And so for me at the Helpdesk, the answer is, we're making the college run. And with the work that we do, we keep the wheels turning. And I think that gave me a great experience as a student, and I want to give that on to others. So I can kind of answer that question. I want to encourage you to think about that. And Lori, I'll pause here for a moment just to see, have we gotten any questions, anything folks are curious about at this point?
I don't see any questions, but I am right with you in this presentation. I think the why for me is that giving students ownership in the process, even if it's seemingly a small project, it becomes something they believe in and they do a better job.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. As folks, if you do have questions, go ahead and chat those in. Lori will let us know. But we'll just go ahead and move right along, because if we get through all of the presentation content, I can actually walk folks through using some of the tools that I'll be happy to share with you at the end of this. So without further ado, here's a little bit of how that, big inspirational part of the talk goes into the work that we've actually done. So the fundamental story leading to this project work at Carleton started in 2011. And at that point, it was kind of a surprise announcement to us that our then separate student help desks and staff faculty help desks were going to be combined. The announcement was made on January 6th, and it was one that was a bit of a shock for various reasons. And it was full combination of the separate locations. And by the way, you need to be operational by the start of fall term. Because it was such an overwhelming announcement, we didn't really have a chance to get a first productive meeting until the middle of February. And with the goal of being operational by September 6th, that was 8 months after the announcement, less than 7 months after the first meeting. And realistically, we had 6 months to figure out how to accomplish this task. And so that was sort of our problem catalyst. There was literally not enough time or staff to get everything done. I sat down one day and made a list of tasks, and then sort of just felt really overwhelmed because it was a long list and I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it alone. However, students at both of our service points at that time, our student help desk and our staff faculty help desk, were actually very well trained. And so I'm sitting here looking at this long list and the students that we have, and figured it was time to use the resources available to fill in those gaps, and that was our summer students. And so I took that big long list of tasks and I just kind of grouped them into sets of 6 or 7 tasks that seemed vaguely related. And they ended up being categorized by like summer lab management, drop-off consultants. This is where student-owned computers come to our help desk and we do software repair for them. And so we needed to figure out how that was going to happen after the merger. We have a program where we have students who are network consultants, and we had a lot of network projects, so that had to stay functional. Documentation, everything referred to what we called the SCIC, the Student Computing Information Center, or Rapid Response, our staff faculty option. And with that in mind, that needed to change. We also had to get training together for our combined environment, and just the overall logistics of how to make one space hold 2 operations and make them one. All of those things turned into these summer projects. And so we started with that list, and I grouped those tasks, and I sat down with our summer workers, and I gave them this list of tasks, and an in-person, and I'm mad at past Kendra about this because I didn't write down what I said verbally. We just kind of presented the structure. I said, okay, each of you is the lead on the project that I just handed to you. And you're going to back each other up on one of the other projects. You can decide which one, but these have to get done, and whoever's the lead for that project is responsible. So if it's stalled, I'm going to come to you and ask what's going on, what do we need to get this going, and then maybe write up a report at the end of summer. Go. And that was about it. That was our project structure, and you can't see the air quotes that I was using there, but that's sort of how we went ahead with this. And we did it. We managed to open in the fall that year, and we didn't die, as evidenced by my current existence. We accomplished far more than we could have done if it had just been the staff members managing the change and the students doing the day-to-day work. However, we didn't come up with any real structure for next steps or transitioning any of these projects after the summer. And so a lot of the work that we got done, if there was any follow-up needed, it was left hanging. And ultimately, all I can say is we don't recommend a surprise 8-month support desk combination. But we did learn a lot of it with those project results. Now, let's fast forward a little bit. I quit my job to go to a swing dance camp in Sweden. And we can kind of move on from that. Ask me about it sometime if you are curious. But I came back. And in 2014, I returned. There was sort of a 3-year game of Helpdesk position swaps. And we mentioned the problem catalyst back in 2011. There was sort of a new catalyst now. The Helpdesk had been understaffed for 6 months, going from the end of our spring term through commencement, reunion, summer projects, and the start of fall term, which is not an ideal time to be understaffed. And at that same time, we had several major issues which led to a spike in calls to the help desk and tickets. We had some major network outages caused by similar weather to what Lori's talking about. Vicious freeze-thaw cycles were actually cutting our fiber connection to the cities. We had problem with our hosted email just crashing unpredictably, and our network storage was causing problems. So it was a really busy time, and the help desks had combined, but as I mentioned, we didn't have any follow-up from that combination project, and so the training for the combined help desk wasn't fully updated, fully developed, and in this high-pressure situation, there hadn't been time for formal training of our students. And so when I started back in 2014, there were 2 problems. First of all, we had to reduce our open ticket count. When I came back, now our current goal for just sort of standard churn of tickets is maybe 50. We expect spikes up to about 150 open issues at once. And we hit a peak of 434 open issues in 2014, which I think about that now and it makes my heart pound. So that was one project, one problem. The other was that we had to retrain our students. Our seniors still had some lingering training and experience. The juniors had learned from them, but the sophomores and the first years had little in the way of formal training and effectively had learned simply how to transfer calls. So they weren't trained and they weren't particularly engaged. From 2 problems ultimately came one solution. There are 3 full-time staff at the help desk working 40 hours a week, myself and 2 colleagues. We have 60 students, and depending on the amount of time they work per week, that ranges from 7.5 to 15 full-time staff members worth of people sitting in chairs. And so math basically said use students. So then the question was how? This is where we start to see another one of those project structures develop. The ticket reduction project was the first one that I saw as kind of a way to hit both of those problems, again, with this one solution. I started out and looked at that ticket log, and since there were 434 tickets, there were plenty of patterns to discern. Duplicates. We had a lot of issues where people sent in the same request multiple times because they hadn't heard back. Or we had issues where the person who sent in the request was no longer at the college. We had issues where the problem couldn't exist any longer because the software that was acting up was no longer at the college. And then we just had some other categorizations of exactly what type of old is this ticket. And so once I had those rough groups, I was able to make a process for most of those tickets that the students could work through flowchart style, and we'll see that in just a moment. But it gave them a very clear path to follow. They didn't have to have expertise in the content of the specific tickets. All they needed to do was evaluate the state of a ticket and then use a predetermined set of systems to respond to them. And so this is the top half of the flowchart, and I have this as a resource in the materials that I'll link to at the end, so you don't have to worry about memorizing it, but you can see here that I tried to come up with a very clear yes, no, move along process. And then those oval balloons, there were specific processes and specific scripts that I developed that students could apply if the ticket evaluated to that sort of situation. So here's the end. I do recommend, you'll notice in the bottom right, accounting for, again, some of those mistakes and issues. We didn't actually ever turn into an alternate reality, as far as I'm aware. But I did want to give my students both a sense of humor, because this was kind of a daunting task, but also I mentioned there will be mistakes, there will be failures. It's just a means of trying to plan for those ahead of time. So moving on to talk a little bit about how that panned out. Within 8 months, we were able to get our ticket down over 75%. We were under 100 tickets. We reduced old tickets, but we're also addressing new. I bring that up because a standard year of calls for us is about 10,000 tickets. And so trying to work from both directions took a lot of effort. And of those 10,000, about 60% of all those tickets tend to come through the help desk at some point. So something was working in terms of solving that ticket count problem. But even more important and exciting for me was the students were immediately more engaged. They weren't just sort of, okay, let me transfer that. They lost that deadpan sense of just performing a rote task, and they were asking questions. They wanted to know more about the systems that they were reading about in their tickets and the people that they were working with. And even after the point where I was requiring students to go through tickets, I still had students proactively choosing to do it because they were excited to be making a difference. And ultimately what I learned from this was that the clarity of this project is what made it successful. The students didn't have these points where they didn't have some mechanism for figuring out how to answer the questions that they had. So again, that was a good swath of me talking. Now it's a chance for you to think just a little bit. In both of the situations that I talked about, 2011 and 2014, we had some major problems that we had to solve. And the reason that these student projects came up was that it was an opportunity. Turning these problems into projects gave us the opportunity to solve multiple things at once. And so what are the problems that you don't have time to solve right now? And those are really some of the key issues. Examples for that for us right now are that we have a bunch of old documentation in our wiki, which isn't a particularly great software system. And there's small enough issues that we never pay attention to this as a major overhaul project, but it's the perfect candidate to turn into a project for some of our students. And so I'll pause for a moment, let Lori come back in if there are any questions, and give you a moment to think about that question. Lori, do we have any questions?
Yet. Nope, nothing yet. I'm still here. This is a quiet group today.
Okay, you know, sometimes that's exactly the sort of day you need if your morning was like mine,
yes,
where things were kind of on fire. So, all right, well, I'm going to take another swallow or two of water, and then I will move along. All right, so we've done a lot of background for the last 20 or so minutes, just kind of building up the foundation of the why, both the motivation and also sort of the impetus for doing some of these projects. But we use this project structure actively now. We use it most significantly during our breaks, particularly summer break. But we will call on this project structure even if we have something that needs to get done during a term. The project structure now has a few things that the previous structures didn't, but that we absolutely learned from those previous structures to build. First of all, there's a better delineation of those roles. You may remember from the 2011 experience that we just kind of said, one of you is a lead, one of you is a backup, go. We've now defined what exactly the responsibilities are of those different positions. Additionally, we've developed a project infrastructure that requires a few different project elements be created and maintained during the course of a project that gives that regular check-in structure, the ability to know how far a project has gone by the end of a break, and to have a sense of what might need to happen next if that project is not currently complete. We've built in some flexibility and contingency plans. As I mentioned, there's infrastructure to transition projects for future work, and fundamentally, this is set up to make it easy to create this project framework for students. And so I can spin up a new project in a span of about 30 minutes. If I have an idea of sort of what we want to do, that is enough to get started, and then through collaborating with our students, the project actually happens. So to talk some of those specifics, our project roles, there are now 3. we have a project lead, and they are absolutely accountable for the success of the project. I tell them that they are supposed to persist through roadblocks and move ahead. So if they feel like they're getting stuck, their number one job is to keep asking questions. They are responsible for developing a task list and a timetable. Take this big project, break it down into smaller parts. What do you think those are going to be? And then they're also responsible for meeting with staff members and sort of reassessing the project throughout. And this is where we really get excited, because I see this panning out for them once they graduate. Project management is nobody's favorite thing, and it's not necessarily inherently taught in some of the classes folks are in, but this is giving them a chance to experiment with that. And we talk about how the best laid plans of really anybody can go awry, and try to work through that process with them. So the lead, the project is their responsibility to make sure happens. However, I also tell them they're not alone. And so a project secondary is the second set of eyes. They are the sanity check. They're there for brainstorming. They're there for go-to assistance. If a student comes up to a point in a project where they just need to process, 50 or so items, they can go to their secondary and say, hey, could you help me with this, and work through this project together. And so that sense that they have somebody designated that they can go to with questions, ideas, or for support that was something that we really expanded as we built out this process. The final element is the backup. And this is where we try to build in more flexibility, because we do encourage our students to, go see their families over break and maybe actually take vacation. And when they're gone, we don't want projects to stall or to miss important deadlines. And so there's a backup designated that either the lead or the secondary can call on, quickly brief, and they can help in a little ad hoc way to make sure a project moves along if there is an absence. So those are our project roles. And I also mentioned project elements. First of all, project description. This is staff written, and it's about the only thing that is staff written. This defines the scope of a project, what the expected deliverables are, and one of the things that I found really helpful is it outlines some of the immediate resources that students may not always think of or know that they can go to. And so this could be, yes, you can come talk to us as your staff supervisors, but you can also talk to this particular sysadmin who has expertise in the area that you're working on. Or you may want to talk to this particular reference librarian who has experience working with this type of information. And so helping them realize that their resources are broader than they may necessarily and immediately think is part of that project description for us. But then, in terms of project elements, we really hand it over to our students at that point. So a timeline. Yes, I expect the student to put together a timeline, but they sort of have liberty to do it however makes sense to them. I ask, determine tasks and milestones, set an initial timeline, but then I challenge them to think about how will you handle interruptions and delays? Are they building in checkpoints early enough to know if things are kind of going off the rails? Are they building in flexibility to account for the fact that they're going to be gone for a week in the middle of July? And really sort of pushing them to think about those sort of side cases and how they think they might address them if and inevitably when they come up. Then there's a resource guide. One of the things that drives some of the folks crazy that I tell about this is I don't limit my students to working in any particular interface. The tools that they can use are numerous. If they want to use Drive because they like Drive, great. If they want to use Dropbox, fine. We have access to Asana for task and project management. If they think that way and would like to use that, that's excellent. If they would like to use Slack, I am okay with that. However, I tell them that I am not all-seeing, nor am I all-knowing, and a week from now, nobody will remember where that has been placed. So they are required to put together a resource guide that documents the location of the materials and the resources the students are using, how they're using them, and if there's any particular access needed. And if they're using a system that isn't supported by Carleton, at the end of summer, I ask them to provide a backup and store it in one of our file storage systems so we don't lose that information. But it's been really important to me to allow students to work flexibly in environments that they like, because I find they get way more done. If they're using a tool that they enjoy using, it's not a hurdle for them. It's just an extension of how they complete the project. Finally, there's a project summary. And again, this is student written, end of break. I've found actually this last year that if I remind them every couple of weeks to just sort of journal about their experiences, for lack of a better word. That's helped with the project summary. But the idea is I want them to give a status update of each of the project elements. I want them to describe what roadblocks did they hit and how did they navigate them, and what work is left, what next steps need to be taken if this project isn't complete. And so we have our project roles, we have our project elements, but then there's this final thing that I have found to be just as important as either of those, and that's actually setting the stage. This goes back to 2011, and the experience that I had just talking with my students in person, and I found that they were excited and motivated to get the work done because there was that sort of very personal connection. We have a meeting at the very beginning of summer to do just this, set the stage. First of all, we let them know that their work makes a difference, and we sort of impact the context in which their project is affecting other work at the college. We had a project a couple years ago where we were migrating from an old email provider to Gmail, and we knew it was a big process and people were anxious about it. And so to be able to tell them that their work on documentation was going to help provide information that would help people not stress out so much, they could understand and see how that was actually impacting the operation of the college. Additionally, we set lofty but achievable expectations. This goes back to that third grade teacher, and the folks will live up to the expectations you have of them. I tell them that, yes, you are in charge of this project, and you may not have done that before, but you have the tools at your disposal to do this, and you are welcome to ask for help. Part of that is creating this idea of a structure of accountability. Because there are multiple roles on a project, they have a built-in sense of accountability to each other, but they're also expected to meet regularly with the staff members, and that starts to build in a sense of accountability back to me, back to my colleagues. And then finally, this is something I have to emphasize throughout the break or the project timeline. There's this balance of independent work and asking for help. And I challenge them sometimes, if they come to me with questions right off the bat, to go off and explore and look for information themselves. And conversely, if I have a student who seems to just kind of be chugging along and I haven't heard from them in a while, I'll encourage them to ask me questions or find out if there are any roadblocks that they've had. And so kind of guiding students in this area is where I find that I'm most engaged. So we're almost to the end of the core content that I have before I jump over to the resources that all of you can make abundant use of should you want to take these ideas and apply them at your school. But one of the fundamental things that I found was really helpful is, this idea of what is success, and being very purposeful defining this. And, depending on the various leadership things that you've done and the various projects, the idea of a SMART, a measurable, an accessible goal, reachable, there's a time frame, that sort of idea applies here. But this is, what's the goal? What does it mean to be successful at this project? And defining that up front has been invaluable for me. And so as you think about some of those problems that might be able to turn into projects, what does it look like to be successful in addressing those? And success comes in different shapes and sizes. If I think about the ticket reduction project, success for me was as much about getting my students engaged as it was about reducing the number of tickets. And so the fact that I had students who were proactively dealing with issues without my asking them, that was a measure of success. So I will pause here one more time, and do we have any questions? Have you had a chance to think about some of those previous moments and have ideas, but are curious about how they might get turned into a project?
This is Lori. I have a couple questions for you. It sounds to me like you're doing some projects that are like in the summer more when you have the students there for longer hours.
Mm-hmm.
Is that more of the case, or are you also having them own projects during the semester when they might only work 7 or 8 hours a week?
That's a great question. And these projects are definitely the easiest to conceptualize during breaks when you have that continuity of a student's time. However, we have used this structure in a couple of different issues. One example I have is we use or have used McAfee on campus, and we had a situation where about 100 of our machines were still operational, but they were not updating to the newest version of our agent, and we were about to be end of life. And so we had to find the computers, coordinate with their owners, schedule time to do various different types of triage and updates. And that process I actually gave to one of our students because we had about a term's worth of time to go over it. And I told them, one of the things that you can do is work with people to schedule during your existing availability. Another thing that you can do is get other windows of availability, and I showed them how to write up tickets and assign them to their peers so that if that project lead couldn't do the troubleshooting work, one of their peers could pick up and complete the task for them. And so it has taken a little bit more creativity to do work during term when student hours are more limited, but we have been able to do it on occasion.
Okay. I guess my other question is, have you ever had an occasion where a student has really dropped the ball and you've had to either reassign the project or really coach the student back to productivity?
We've had a couple of situations where sometimes it's actually external life situations that just had a student distracted and not really focusing on work while at work, and coaching them through that process was part of what we were doing. And in response to this, sometimes I will say the projects that I have been capable of doing have been guided by the students that I know I have at my disposal. And so sometimes when I think of a project that I'm doing for a break, I will be able to do more or less on that particular project because I know which student is going to be kind of taking the lead. So there is some degree of shaping a project that does depend on what I know about a student. However, the inverse of that is that I have more often been surprised by students who have seemed less engaged and who really flourish with this type of structure. But that has come down to diligence with just making sure that I do touch base with them at whatever established intervals. If I can be consistent with, if they decided they wanted to do bi-weekly meetings, having those meetings and really making sure that we're staying on top of that, then within that structure, even some of the students who I'd thought, you know, this could be a risky project, have done phenomenal work. So it kind of goes both ways. If you make conscientious decisions about what types of projects you're going to bring up during certain summers, that helps with success. I will also say it's been easier the longer I've done projects to have students who are a little bit less engaged do bigger scope projects, just because I'm better at managing them. So it takes some practice, it does take some thoughtfulness, but more often than not, I'm surprised by the work that's better than I expected.
We have a question from one of the attendees. She wonders, how does the faculty and college staff respond to students working on projects?
That's a great question. And a lot of the projects, and forgive me for a moment. Perfect. I'm actually going to go to this next slide. Some of the projects that we've done have been more internal. There have been a couple of projects that have external impacts. And so training development, that has been training by our students in collaboration with me for our students. And so our staff and faculty do not care about that. As long as the students are learning, that's okay. Our ticket process review, however, that has been in collaboration with our students for saying, how do we actually handle and route tickets? What sort of expectations do we have for getting in touch with people, and how do we communicate with them? And that was something that I laid the groundwork for, but actually the feedback of our students has led to much better processes. And so that's one where the work that they do does impact the outside of the college. Staff and faculty may not know that, and so that does help, but it impacts it in a guided way. And so with all of these projects, even though the work is independent, we are still touching base as staff members. But then if I look to something like the documentation review, this is our students working on our actual public-facing wiki pages and putting together content that is accessed by everybody at the college. And I think by and large, being able to demonstrate that the caliber of work that these students are doing is at times equivalent to or even better than mine when the student has been a history major or an English major and are just better at writing and explaining these concepts. It tends to be a look at our deliverable and see how good it is, and then the rest of the community is like, okay, we do still have some apprehension about students providing support to staff and faculty. So that's an active concern on our campus. And so you'll notice that the project work here doesn't always involve engaging with staff and faculty unless it's in a very procedural method, as I mentioned with that McAfee process. And at that point, it's typically here are the 12 steps that you need to do to upgrade McAfee. If you do not want to do it, we can send one of our student techs. And that has actually been fairly well received because they can see that it's a guided process. The students have support, there are clear expectations. And so that sort of stuff has gone over well, if that helps answer that question.
That was a perfect lead in to your next slide.
Yeah, that was great. I should plant people in the audience more often. Any other questions coming up, Lori? Because if not, I believe our next steps are sort of wrapping up and looking at these resources that I'm talking about.
Yep, I think you can keep going.
Okay, sounds good. So, do-it-yourself projects. These are these resources, and I can, first of all, just send this link out in the chat. Whoop. Nope. There we go. It's a pretty easy link if you wanted to type it in. This goes to a Google Drive folder that I'm actually going to demonstrate in just a moment. And it's read-only because I want to encourage you to make copies. And what I want to say is don't reinvent the wheel. If the stuff that I've talked about here seems interesting, please take the work that I have done and adapt it to work for your institution, but don't feel like you have to come up with your own structure, your own starting point. And so if we go ahead and jump here, I hope that I have successfully changed to my Google Drive screen. It looks like you can see that. This is what's inside that student project documentation folder, what you would find at that link. And I'll zoom in just a little bit so it's easier to see. First of all, at the top, I did put together a bit of a README, and it mostly contextualizes these different elements in case people weren't at this presentation, or if, like me, a month from now, you can't remember half of what was said. So this explains those different resources. And then the break project parameters document. This sort of sets the stage for how these projects operate. And so if I open that, first of all, you will see that I tend to, I really like to find ways to install levity in the work that I do with our students. But this has clear definitions of all of those positions that I talked about, all of those project elements, with much more detail that I went into in the presentation. And so I go through, I edit and revise this each year, but feel free to copy it, make use of it, adapt it, make it your own as needed. I give that to every group. Every group gets that so they understand what does it mean to have a project, what does it mean to have these positions. And then I have example elements that students have created. I'm going to actually jump down. This down here, the template. This is the nuts and bolts of developing these projects. And this is the sort of thing that when I open it up, if I have an idea for a project, it can take me as little as 30 minutes to get this written up. And so it has all of the basic framework here, project summary. There's this idea of primary project goals and secondary project goals, the differentiation being the primary
Kendra, can you hear me? I think I just lost your sound.
access to certain systems. It helps me get those contacts defined for everybody. And it reminds me to put together my set of deadlines. You know, we have different events on campus that may predicate when students can or can't do their project work. And so we'll have some of those important dates in here to give the students a framework. But this template, I make copies of it for every project that we work on, fill it out, and that has been incredibly helpful for getting our students spun up in combination with the parameters that explain how to have this. The internal document that I have here is just reminding myself the work that I do to get some of these projects up and running. This is a resource guide that one of our students put together. Similarly, it's a project timeline that one of our students put together, and then a copy of this presentation. And so if you follow that bit.ly link as seen here, that's what all of those resources are. And like realistically, borrow, adapt these, and mostly if you just give me a shout out if you use them, if people ask, that's all I ask, because I've gotten a lot of help as I've worked at the help desk developing these materials and more. And I would love nothing more than to be able to see all of you be able to take that and run with it. And so with that in mind, I do want to just kind of open it up in these last few minutes. Any questions? If you have a problem and can't possibly conceive how that might turn into a project, or if you think you have a project but can't quite figure out how it might break up into goals, or really anything like that, now or in the future, I am happy to answer these questions via email later. I love brainstorming these sorts of ideas. I think the challenge is intriguing and exciting. So are there any lingering questions?
Well, first of all, Kendra, I want to say when you opened up that Google Drive folder, my jaw dropped on the floor. Thank you so much
Well,
for
I hope
creating that and sharing that information with us. I was having a hard time, quite honestly, figuring out how to instill some project management techniques in students. And you made that so easy for us. So thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I've been so excited to be able to do this, and we've had tremendous success here that, like, really, I'd be super psyched if anybody else can benefit from that.
So does anyone have any questions or comments for Kendra? Again, a very,
if not, that is
very quiet group.
That's okay. I understand those days and sometimes not having the cycles. So I will just reiterate one more time. My email inbox is always open, for better or for worse. And so as those questions come up for yourself, your peers, if you just want a copy of that link, whatever the case may be, feel free to reach out to me now, a month from now, at SIGUCCS. I will be there this year. Whenever we cross paths, I'm happy to help answer questions or provide ideas.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your leadership in this area. Yes, Susan also said, thank you for sharing. We will be figuring out how to apply this. The thank yous are coming in now to the question areas. So thank you so much, Kendra.
Thank you all so much for coming.
Yeah. Everybody have a great afternoon. We'll see you next week if you're able to join us. Goodbye.
All righty. Take care. Bye.